sure, if you ban AI, maybe 50% of students will not be using it, but the other 50% will be using it. This will create even more like a distortion of competition in a sense.
Thibault Schrepel, Associate Professor of Law at the Vrije Universiteit van Amsterdam and founder of Stanford's Computational Antitrust project. We explore how AI can improve legal education and enforcement and why we shouldn't ban it or worship it, but test it, measure it, and adapt our rules.
All of what we've heard, that AI will kill universities, that law schools is over, you could do it all with an AI system, well, it's actually not so true. The students are smart enough to figure it out for themselves. So my take is that we should experiment, measure the effects, and importantly, find a way to make sure that each university at the minimum, and why not all the universities in the Netherlands, can actually gather the knowledge and see what works, what doesn't.
Work together.
Exactly.
And I think the bigger lesson is also here that students really learn to think in systems, not in rules.
What I think we're going to see is that each single law firms will also acquire that technical expertise, and we're going to see specialization where teams of computer data scientists, people with computational science expertise, will make sure that all of the other lawyers can focus more on the substance and on writing and generating ideas. Future-proof regulation are doomed to fail, no matter how good they are, no matter how much you want to rely on broad definitions or big principles instead of specific rules. At some point, they're going to be outdated, ineffective, or harmful. Instead, I think what we should have
This episode is powered by Zeno. Zeno's AI navigates law like a human legal professional, grounded in authoritative sources, backed by traceable citations. Visit zeno.law and make deep thinking your competitive edge.
Thibault, welcome. Great to have you on the show. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much.
I want to start this conversation with legal AI maybe more general AI in legal education. A few months ago, there was an opinion piece in one of the biggest newspapers of the Netherlands from two people who teach at the university, and they asked for a ban on AI at law schools. And I saw, I think 2 weeks ago, another post on LinkedIn from a teacher from university asking for a ban on the use of AI on law schools. I'm curious, what would be your response to those people?
Yeah, I would say let's not do that. That's definitely one extreme view. Another one would be to say we need to force every single teacher to use AI. I think that's also as equally extreme. And my view is that we need to let everyone explore different ways. It's way too early to be able to measure the impact based on the quality of the students, the subject that we teach, the evolution of technology. I mean, study mode, deep search functions were not a thing a year ago. Now they exist. So my take is that we should experiment, measure the effects, and importantly, find a way, probably institutional way, to make sure that each university at the minimum, and why not all the universities in the Netherlands, can actually gather the knowledge and see what works, what doesn't.
Work together.
Exactly. Yeah. And
that's not happening right now.
It's not happening right now. And even within each universities, I see that many professors have been, doing this and that for now a couple of years, and there is no general database as to what works and what doesn't. So here we are trying to do that. I'm sure others are trying to do that as well, but eventually we're going to have to come all together.
Let's say we ban AI on law schools. What will happen with students who pass those law education and have no knowledge about AI at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think they would, because they would be using it. And the ability to detect, as we know, is extremely low. It works to some extent if they prompt AI in a stupid way, which is to say, please just answer the exam question. I certainly can detect patterns. I can give you a couple. If there is a verb in ing after a comma, usually that's AI. If there are 3 qualificatives, that's usually AI. So there are a couple of those that I can recognize. But as soon as they start prompting the system in saying, write it in the style of this author, then that's it, that's gone. And in fact, I tried with the US Constitution and it says that it's AI generated. So this ability to detect what is AI or not, I think we have to forget the idea. It's not going to work. So sure, if you ban AI, maybe 50% of students will not be using it, but the other 50% will be using it. And so this will create even more like a distortion of competition in a sense.
Yeah, and also after their law school. I mean, when they're done with their study, it will also create a big gap between those group of students.
Yeah, certainly huge. So I wanted actually 2 years ago to organize a conference with practitioners, hoping that some of them would ban AI or, do things differently. And I realized, well, all of them are doing the exact same, which is to say to junior associates, yeah, certainly use it. What I see is that in most of the firms I've been in touch with, they actually tasked not the most junior associate, but the one with 3 to 5 years experience to actually check on the newcomers. So certainly there is a need for that, which doesn't mean that universities should do it for that sole reason. There are different objectives with education. It may be to make them ready for the professional world, in which case, sure, let's do it. It will be to actually teach them how to think, where we could actually discuss how to use AI. This is more touchy, and it's also about socializing, learning to become a professional. If you have a deadline and you can't make it, learning that you should send an email before the deadline and not after. And here, I think AI has pretty much no impact. So I'm not saying that we should do it because they are using it in law firms. I think it's one of the reasons, but there are other reasons why.
More general reasons.
More general reasons. I could talk about what I've done and the experiments I've been conducting.
We will touch upon it in a second. But the writers of this opinion, they are, I don't know, afraid that students will use this as a shortcut.
Yeah.
They will use AI as a shortcut and then don't develop the skills that they need for their research, for understanding how the law is working, for understanding how to search for law cases, etc.
Yeah.
What is your view on using it as a shortcut?
Yeah, so it could be true if you keep the same exams, the same exercise, and in a world where you have AI, it could be a shortcut. And I'll give you an example. I've done some research on what used to be an exam in the United States a long time ago, about 50 years ago. One exam which was very common was to actually grade students on their ability to navigate a physical library, to actually be able to locate cases. Of course, there are no law schools in the United States, nor in the EU or elsewhere in the world, grading students on that, which means that if you were to keep the same kind of exam with new technology, with new capacities, sure, it could be used as a shortcut because it doesn't make sense anymore. So we probably need to adapt what we test. But to be specific, I'll give you one very specific example. In one course that I'm teaching, the task is to rewrite some provisions of the AI Act. What I've done is that I prompted 2 different systems to do that live with, on a huge screen. Regardless of the name of the system, one came up with a very short new version of the AI Act, and the other one came up with a very long version. And because of that, I was able to introduce a discussion which I never had in a classroom before as to what is good writing. And it's not that one is necessarily clearer or better than the other. Those are 2 different ways of drafting with great potential and pitfalls for those 2 different techniques. But I was able to teach my students and actually to show them in practice how it looks like, which is something that, again, I couldn't do before, or I could do by preparing that, but I didn't have this live element, which makes it very exciting to my students in the classroom. So in that case, there is no shortcuts, and certainly they are not deprived of the ability to think. On the contrary, they were able to think about different ways of drafting and compare them, which I think benefited them.
But there is no shortcut because you change the way you teach and you change the way of your form of education.
Yeah.
But if you keep everything the same and then you try to implement AI in it, that's not going to work. So you also, as a teacher, you need to understand how AI is working and also how AI changes the way you teach, but also the way how you test. And that's not happening at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, it all stays the same, and then AI is coming into the game. People are like, yeah, but now we're going to take shortcuts and now they don't understand how it works. No, the whole system needs to change to make sure that you adapt on the change of bringing AI in.
Yeah, because one easy solution is to say, well, they can use AI to write essays. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to switch my exam from being a take-home exam to an exam on campus on computers that we control with no AI. I mean, it works in a sense that, yes, they're not going to be able to use AI, but is that a skill that they need in, nowadays once they're going to exit university? Well, to some extent, maybe, but not as much as used to be the case. So indeed, there is a need for change. However, if a professor is really uncomfortable in using AI for whatever reasons, good or bad, right? I think it would be problematic to force that teacher or that professor to use AI in the classroom. I could not imagine if someone was coming and telling me you should teach that way, I'm going to force you, then it's going to create a great teaching experience and that students will benefit from it. So if some professors want to ban the use of AI in their teaching, let them do it. And to some degree, this will create even more diversity and maybe students will end up benefiting from these different techniques.
That's interesting. You just mentioned skill and new skills. Students also need to learn new skills for the future after their law school. And I think there was a comment on one of the interviews we did before, and someone asked, what kind of stack of skills do I need to learn to make sure I'm ready for the future when I'm studying law?
Yeah.
I mean, it's more broad than only AI, than only know how to use AI, but it's a broad set of skills. What kind of advice would you give to a person who's asking, what kind of stack of skills do I need to build to be ready for the future as a lawyer?
Yeah, I would say number one is kind of a meta answer, but you need to find a way to stay aware of technological development if you are interested, because with new technologies will come new skills that you probably need to acquire. So you need to know what you need to know in a sense, right? And now to be more micro, there is a database by a professor somewhere in France in a business school that is listing all the cases in which courts, for the most part so far in the US, are recognizing that in some of the conclusions sent by the lawyers, there were some citations that were clearly hallucinated by an AI system, right? Which means that if I were a lawyer today, I would certainly want, when the other side is giving conclusion to the judge, at least to do a check as to whether the footnotes are real or not. Because if they are not, then, it's very good news for my client.
And you can check this database. I've seen this database. I mean, it's open source.
Of course, it's open source. So what it says is that how should you then process if there is not just one set of conclusion, but let's say 100 documents submitted before the court with each 100 references? That would make it extremely burdensome for you to open them all manually and to verify, is that a real one or a hallucinated one? So maybe the skill you need to acquire is also to use AI system in order to verify, double check whether or not there are hallucinations, right? So that will be a skill that you do need today. Now, do you need that skill in 2035 when we are very specifically fine-tuned AI model with very few hallucinations? Maybe not, right? So again, to come back to my first answer, there is, in a sense, the need to know what you should know. And this is evolving, which is good news, but also I understand the sad news because it means you cannot say, well, I've done the work in 2025, problem fixed.
But that's
good.
with nothing the case.
No,
I mean,
exactly.
You always need to be sharp on new developments and make sure that you keep on the foreground of what's happening and know how to adapt.
True, but I would argue that the space in which we evolve right now is evolving actually faster than what we even anticipate, because it evolves by combination of past technologies and it evolves non-linearly. What it means is that, sure, I'm almost guaranteed that in a year from now, GPT-6 or whatever we have or equivalent will be faster than GPT-5, but it will also gain new capacities. And those I cannot anticipate, they emerge. So it's not just about speed, it's about what we can do with the system. And again, it seems impossible for anyone to predict in 5 years from now the kind of capacities that we will have. So there is even more of a need, in a sense, to stay up to date in that space than what maybe, if you are interested in how to make plants survive, which, by the way, I'm extremely bad at. So don't take any advice from me. I don't know if this
plant is real, but it looks
I think it's
fake.
real. I think it's real, yeah.
Let's talk about the research that you did by using AI, and I think more specific ChatGPT, in your education. You run a 2-year research, which you published a few months ago. We are now recording this in November 2025, and I think September 2025, October 2025, you published your research.
Yep.
Can you tell what was your research all about? What did you do?
Sure. So what I've done is that I run an experiment in a course that I am teaching here at the VU on the law of AI, which I'm mentioning because it's already a bias, and I will come back to that, and a potential limit to my study. What I've done basically is that all the students had the same lectures, and when it comes to the seminar where we apply the knowledge and practice the acquisitions of specific skills, I divided them in 3 different groups. Group number 1, no AI. So the task, as I mentioned already, was to rewrite some provisions of the AI Act. We agreed on principles of good regulations, looking at OECD principles. So the objective was very clear, and I said, well, you have 20 minutes, and then we discuss changes you've made to those provisions. Group number 2, I told them, here you can use any AI system that you want. And I was walking around, so, I could verify whether or not they were using it. And
Which systems?
I mean, which systems, if I say that all the group, 100% of them have decided to use AI, right? Although they were not forced to do it. But I said, this is all I'm going to give you in terms of instructions, and, you'll figure it out. And group number 3, I taught them before, and I took about half an hour to teach them how to use an AI system, how to prompt the system in, creating feedback loops and building on the answers that you would get from the AI system. It was not rocket science, but still, it was a good exposition to the limitations of those systems. Now, in the discussions in the groups, I found that group number 1, the one without AI, I gave them about 20 minutes to redraft provisions of the AI Act. That's an enormous task, right? And it's very unfair to ask to do that in 20 minutes.
It's a difficult law also.
It's very difficult, very technical. And yet, after 10 minutes, for most of the groups, they didn't know what to do anymore. They were done with it, right? So no inspiration, and they were stuck in a sense. Group number 2 was the most disastrous in the classroom. What they did is that they asked the AI system, they took most of the modifications that the AI system will give them. And before entering the classroom, I also actually prompted the system and told them, this is the original version of the AI Act, and this is the one that I used, that I got when using an AI system. And in a sense, all of what students were doing was discussing whether the changes I proposed and the one they got were good or bad. Some of them kept changes that made absolutely no sense, or at least they could not justify them. So they changed words such as shall, and instead of that use must. And I was like, okay, what's the difference between the two? Maybe you can justify it, but they were unable to do that. Or base case scenario, they returned to the original version of the AI Act. So they did not complete the task because the task was to improve on the original version of the AI Act, not to return to it. So that group was a disaster. Group number 3 did slightly better than the other 2. They had interesting discussions, and in the end, probably ended up in a space where they had better provisions. Now, what's quite interesting is that then I put those 3 groups to the very same exam, and I was able to measure the acquired knowledge the same way. One exam was a multiple choice, and the other exam was a skill exam where they had to do what we've done in a classroom, which is to redraft those provisions of the AI Act, other provisions. What I found is that group number 1, the one that didn't use AI at all, performed the worst amongst the 3 group. Group number 2, which had horrible discussions in the classroom, still probably because they figure it out for themselves, and when it really counts with a grade, were able to use AI in a way that was okay and did better than group number 1. And group number 3, because they were trained in how to use AI, did better than the other 2, right? This was year number 1. Year number 2, I do the same. And yes, I discuss, and maybe I will try to anticipate some of the comments, the ethical questions around the use of AI in the classroom and the experiments. In the first year, we decided that it was ethically okay for me to do that because I couldn't anticipate which group will actually score the best grade. So it was not me sacrificing, some sort of student or part of the classroom. In year number 2, the idea was to say, well, let's see if the results that I got in year number 1 are being confirmed or not. And to some extent, they may not be confirmed. So again, it wasn't me, trying to tell one group, well, you're not going to do as well as the other 2, but it's good for my experiment. I'm not going to do the same experiment this year because now my results have been partially confirmed. And I know for a fact that over time, what I see is that whether I teach them how to use AI or not, they tend to converge, those 3 groups. Group number 3, the one where I'm taking the time to explain how to use AI, still does better than the other 2, but it's converging, which shows 2 things. First, students learn. So to some extent, all of what we've heard that AI will kill universities, that law schools is over, you could do it all with an AI system, well, it's actually not so true. The students are smart enough to figure it out for themselves. But still, if you teach them how to use it, they seem to benefit from it. So in a sense, it's a very nuanced findings that I have, because it means that if you don't want to use AI in a classroom, they're going to be fine. If you want to do it, then probably they could benefit from it. But pretty much this was the gist of the experiment.
And I think the bigger lesson is also here that students really learn to think in systems, not in rules. Also, because of using AI, they understand maybe the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And they understand like how these systems are working, and not only how to read one specific article, for example.
Yeah.
And that's way more easier if you use AI, I think, because it's easier and faster to understand this bigger picture of, for example, the AI Act, which is an extremely difficult law. Was that also surprising for you that you saw that students really learn to think in systems and less in rules because of this whole experiment?
Yeah, so this is where the studies that I've done is clearly suffering from many limitations. One is that the sample was rather small. I had about 200 students for year number 2. And 2, they were AI students. So in a bachelor specializing in AI, right? So it means they didn't have legal knowledge, but they had technical expertise for most of them. So system thinking, complexity thinking is something that is already part of the curriculum. So to answer your question, I was not that surprised to see that they were able to do that, because I know that's a skill that they have already. What would be interesting is trying to deploy the very same experiment or a variation of it in the law school and see if indeed they acquire this kind of, I call it also sometimes Lego thinking, where you try to build on top of previous knowledge, which is something that is hard to acquire. But I do think that with the use of AI systems, and again, by prompting different systems to do the tasks and show them the different kind of results, they get a better sense of indeed this.
And they also get a better sense of how these systems are working and why you get different answers. And that was what you already mentioned before, that you then also have a different kind of discussion with your students about things you would never have a discussion before.
Yeah.
If we then look at like law education and then prompting, for example, and how to know how to use these systems, should prompting be an important part of legal education?
So in 2025, yes. In 2030, I don't know. The reason why I'm telling you that is that it seems that from empirical work that I've read, there is still a real importance for the prompts that you can put in the system. And different prompts may actually lead to good answers or bad answers. I'll give you another example of something that I've done in the classroom. Here in the Netherlands, we generate course manual or syllabus, right? So I'm going to say for each week, those are the papers I want you to read, the cases I want you to read. And you give that.
They're big.
They're big. I love them. Students probably hate them.
I hate them.
Yeah, exactly. But at least that's something that gives some clarity, right? As to what you're going to cover for each week of the course. What I told the student is, put that into the AI system of your choice and ask to receive a weekly or daily email that will see in the world around you what is relevant in relation to the content of the course. This is not something that they could do on their own. I mean, they could certainly screen 1 or 2 newspapers, but certainly not the entire world, right? And what I saw is that some students, because they prompted the right system the same way, got excellent results. So I would open every single class in saying, okay, what do you get? And it's a very interactive way to start a lecture, right? So they liked it, I liked it. Some other students, they got disastrous results because the prompt was not good enough and the system probably was not the right one. So I don't want to name names, but whether you use Perplexity, OpenAI, Mistral, Anthropic will give you very different results. So in today's world, it counts. Now, it seems that those systems are becoming more and more tolerant as to the weaknesses in the prompt, and that the legal prompt engineering kind of, space is actually losing importance. Because, and we see that now, when you prompt the system in a way that is unclear, it will actually return an answer and saying, do you mean that? Do you want me to do that? Which was not the case 2 years ago. So is it something that we should teach them in 2025? Yes. Is it something that should stay on the curriculum for a long time? I don't know.
So I was interviewing Richard Susskind a few months ago, and I also asked him about legal education. And he's a big fan of making sure that we have AI or form of AI inside of legal education, because he thinks, and I agree with him, that it's going to be very, very important, even more important than today. But what he hears from his colleagues is, there is no time, there's no space, the curriculum is full. There is no room for teaching AI because we need to teach them the law courses.
Yep.
How do we make sure that we create time in curriculum, maybe in the Netherlands or maybe here, we are at the VU right now,
Yeah.
To make sure that AI is a part of the curriculum for legal education?
Yeah. So many things comes to mind. First, if you don't do it, it takes time. Why? Because now what I see is that there are exams that may be AI generated, and it takes me time to actually detect whether or not it is and whether they used it the right way. When it comes to master thesis, I know this is a controversial statement. I think we should get rid of them, because what I see now is that there is a tendency for students to generate part of it with AI system. Then I take my human time to make comments. They take my comments, put the draft plus my comments into an AI system and regenerate a new draft. And some of them, I think it's very obvious that if I give you that amount of comments and you come back to me 2 hours after I sent an email with a totally new version of the master thesis, something's happening. And it's taking me a lot of time to explain to them this is not professional. Then what do I want to do? I'm tempted to use an AI system to grade the thesis, but I'm not doing it. So not using AI or putting it into the curriculum takes time already. 2, you may want to create extra activities where you would say, I'm going to teach 6 hours, the whole cohort, how to use AI at the beginning of the year. That's an investment of 6 hours, but I think the return of investment will be extremely high. And 3, you don't have to necessarily create a new course, although all universities have already legal research or, professionalization courses where AI could be integrated already, but you could also do it in each individual course. If I teach computational law or blockchain law, I could do it there and tailor the specific use of AI to my actual teaching. So in that sense, it's not time consuming. And again, on the contrary, it will probably save you time down the line.
Are students transparent about using AI then for their master thesis?
Yeah, I stopped asking the question. Actually, in the classroom, I used to ask the question, who's using AI? And then they were giggling, laughing, because, well, it's very obvious that it's not always all of them, but 99% of them. And when it comes to even master thesis, I'm going to tell you something which may be controversial, but if I receive a final version of a master thesis full of typos and grammatical issues, I'm going to be upset. Because whether you want to use AI or an AI system to correct the typos, I think it is not acceptable to send that in 2025. So to some extent, I may be tempted. I'm not going to tell them, but I'm going to make sure they understand that, there are systems out there, and please don't actually send it in such a bad shape. Now, it's a different story if they generate the whole master thesis using an AI system, and that they certainly won't say. But yes, it's happening. And you may have seen this video, I think it was last year in the United States, in the graduation ceremony in the United States, where, they have like the whole, they're dressed like they do in the United States. It looks very cool. You have all the professors coming on stage and they call on each of the students individually. And then the camera moves on this one student, and he actually takes his computer and shows all the prompts of what he's been doing all year long. And you understand that he has not done a single thing and just prompted the system to generate answers to all the exam and eventually graduated. This is extremely problematic. To come back to what we discussed earlier, probably because the curriculum was not at all adapted to a world in which you have AI. And if they use it that way, of course, they wouldn't say, but it's happening.
This show is sponsored, and it's sponsored by an AI tool called Zeno. And Zeno is an AI native legal workspace built for Dutch and EU law, and it navigates law like a human legal professional, secure, transparent, and grounded in authoritative sources. And as part of this collaboration, they can always ask a question to the guests that I have in the show. And the question for you is, as AI literacy becomes increasingly important for legal professionals, how can law schools and firms then turn it into genuine capability rather than just a buzzword?
So certainly so. I could tell you that the interest is growing. And I know that because on the network law review that I created and that I co-run, I do have access to all the statistics as to who's accessing which web pages and which articles. We've published ones about 4 years ago, I would say, entitled something like Open Source Resources for Lawyers to Learn About Computer Science, or something like that. There are plenty of those resources out there, right? I can name a couple if you are interested in that, but it's easy to Google or to use any other search engine and to find them. I see the numbers and it's increasing a lot. Now, to be sure, we are not asking lawyers to become computer scientists. Lawyers won't be, for the most part, able to develop their own foundation models, even to fine-tune foundation models or to use RAG system. This is way too technical. But if they can reach the level where they can actually have a discussion and a dialogue with computer scientists working at their firm, their governmental agency, their company, that's where I think they need to be. And I see an interest in that. And from my little non-empirical experience, when I used to teach in a program doing law and economics, I would see most of the students complaining about when came the time to teach them about econometrics or very advanced economic tools. When it comes to computer science, somehow when I teach basic of coding, basic of Python, they love it. So there is an appetite for that, which is extremely good news and the reason why I'm positive about the future.
So Zeno is a legal AI vendor, and what I see in the US now is that law schools work together with these kind of vendors to make sure that students have access to these tools and that they can use it full time.
Yep.
And they can also use it. Those systems are built for lawyers. Those systems are built for a legal profession. And for me, that's an interesting thought to say as a law school, hey, now all our students have access to this very specific tool, which they can use during their study, instead of, say, a more general tool like ChatGPT, which is not built for lawyers. Would it be a nice idea to, for example, have a law education here in the Netherlands, give them access for free to a legal vendor so other students can work with it and can learn from it?
Yeah, I think it would be, especially looking at the results of the little study that I've done. Because again, if you give them access to the tool and it's all you do, they'll figure it out for the most part, right? So they're not going to use it. Yes, exactly. They're not going to use it in a stupid way. And if there are hallucination problems or if there are a problem of not being able to find how to use the system to generate the right answers, they'll figure it out, right? Now, if you were to teach how to use some of those tools, probably it's for the better. But again, I think we're going to move there anyway, right? I mean, every single US and EU law school, as far as I know, provides students with access to some specialized tools, specialized journals, specialized tools, huge databases. So I see no reason why in a couple of years, maybe a couple of months, they wouldn't give access to more AI-specific tools.
Let's talk about the AI Act. You already mentioned it a few times also for the research you did. I interviewed the person who came up with the AI Act. Of course, he's not the only one, but he was the co-reporter. So he was the one who was responsible for making sure that the act was passed. And I asked him also about future proof of this act, because these developments are going so fast. And you also did a lot of research to the AI Act, and also if it's future proof and how we can make sure that laws are future proof for all these new developments. Do you have the feeling that the AI Act, but maybe also other laws that we have on these kind of technologies, are future-proof enough for how fast all this innovation is going?
Yeah, so it's not, and it shouldn't be, and it can't be. And the AI Act is probably not the worst. We're, looking at how future-proof it is, but I'm going to explain a bit of my answer in more details. The idea behind future-proof regulation, it could be read differently, but if I look at EU institutions, what I mean by that is that it's so good, it's so well drafted that it can actually accommodate future events. So if I just take a step back for a second, if I talk about a fabric that is fireproof, what it means is that if fire comes, the fabric can resist and stay what it is. Waterproof, very handy in the Netherlands, it means that water won't come through. Bulletproof, I mean, you get the point. It stays what it is. And that's the idea of future-proof regulation. It stays what it is, and it remains relevant and effective. Now, the problem, and that's the big difference between water, fire, bullets, and technology, is that, as we discussed, technology evolves non-linearly, right? So you can't assign properties to technologies that will always stay very constant and against which the regulation will stay consistent over time. So instead of making it future-proof, which already we can see in the AI Act failed at the stage of the draft to the final version of the AI Act, because the original idea was to have it risk-based approach, meaning we actually look for the reason why you are developing an AI system, and depending on where it's going to be deployed, we're going to actually assign a risk category. Education is risky. Using AI to make plastic plant, again, that's a real one, it's not risky because worst case scenario, it doesn't look good. That makes sense, but it doesn't make sense in a world with ChatGPT and competitors where I could actually use an AI system for many different purposes. I cannot say ChatGPT is risky or non-risky. It depends on why I'm using it. So luckily enough, the final version of the AI Act was not finally implemented. So they were able to create a new chapter that they called capability-based, in a sense where you look at how capable is the AI system. And if you are above certain specific threshold, 10 to the power of 25 flops or other metrics, then the system is deemed to be powerful enough to be used for many different things. And then we're going to assign very specific provisions. That makes sense. That was lucky enough that ChatGPT appeared in November 2022 and sparked a discussion around those capability system and other chatbot and other techniques. But what if the AI Act was implemented before ChatGPT? We will have then a risk-based approach, which doesn't make sense in a world in which we have ChatGPT. That means that future-proof regulation are doomed to fail, no matter how good they are, no matter how much you want to rely on broad definitions or big principles instead of specific rules. At some point, they're going to be outdated, ineffective, or harmful. Instead, I think what we should have, which is in a sense another way to make it future-proof, but again, not under the definition of future-proof, is to have them adaptive. So you have a regulation and you say, those are the objective. Those are the metrics we're going to use to measure success, whether we reach those objectives or not. Those are the thresholds above which we will consider that it is effective and under which we will consider that it is not. And this is the mechanism we're going to put in place to change the regulation if necessary because we are under the thresholds. I think it's feasible. The AI Act has a little bit of that, but certainly not on key items. So the definition of AI cannot be revised. When it comes to the high-risk system, we can only add more, but we cannot take out obligations on companies. And so I will be in favor of adaptive regulation, which is in a sense future responsive, as opposed to have it future-proof, which is that I don't care about the future, I'm good to go.
But that also means that you need like fast feedback loops to adapt regulation.
So I think, fast in a sense that you do want the ability to collect data real time or actually in a very fast way.
How? How can you collect data for a law like this and then make those changes?
So what you see is that in most of those new acts, including the AI Act, there are provisions on the company to report how difficult it might be to comply with the AI Act and what are the effects. So in the case of the AI Act, they have to report on ICT incidents, it could be cybersecurity risks and so on and so forth. What we do not see is that those obligations will be packaged in something that machine can read. So the AI Act does not mandate that company, when they send those reports, they send it in a way that the commission can compute. So it's fine for them to print that and to send millions of pages to the commission, which means the commission will be unable to actually process all of that information, and even less so to then trigger some thresholds. But to come back to your question, you probably want, on a real-time basis, or at least on a fast basis, to actually take all the information about what the Act is creating on the market out there to put it back into the European Commission. But it doesn't mean that regulation should change daily. Because if it does, then you may have an issue of legal certainty, right? Because you're not going to have any idea as to what's going to be the AI Act tomorrow.
There's no trust anymore then.
Exactly. Or at least it becomes more problematic. But it could be that you're going to say, well, if we see that we are under the threshold, above the threshold for more than a year, then we change it, right? So you could already time what are the mechanisms and when you're going to change the regulation. And if you do that, you do see legal certainty. I'll give you one example, which is outside of technology. Here in the Netherlands, I was amazed to see that there are, at the red lights, not all of them, but some of them, some detectors that will detect how heavy or is the car or is the amount of people waiting at the red light. And here next to the campus, we do have one actually, which is a very good example where I'm going to see that it says I have to wait for 40 seconds. And as soon as I arrive, I'm detected and I see that it goes from 40 seconds to 0 second green light in about, 3 to 4 seconds, right? That's an adaptive regulation. And yet, as far as I know, there are no more car crashes in the Netherlands than in other countries, despite the fact that the regulation is adaptive. As long as you are aware that the regulation is adaptive and it functions properly, I think you can maintain legal certainty and make sure that the regulations stay up to date, which is what we want, certainly in the AI space.
But I think if we look at the laws that we have right now, not only in AI, but more in general, we don't have a lot of adaptive laws.
No.
I mean, in the Netherlands, we have labor laws from, the beginning of the 1900s.
Yeah.
So what do you teach your students about this concept of adaptive law?
One issue, and public choice economists looked at that, is that as a policymaker, your interest might be in making the law adaptive if you are concerned by the effect of the regulation. But what if the effect actually show that the regulation that you promise will be good is actually totally ineffective, or even worse, harmful, right? It does not attain the objective, it harms innovation. If meant to be good for the environment, it does nothing. Then you are in a difficult position because you then have to revise the law on the basis that what you did was ineffective. And that politically might not be rewarding. It depends on each EU countries, but we see that there is, from the get-go, a tendency to actually have very vague objectives for regulations. If I ask about the objective of the AI Act, it's nearly impossible to come up with just one. At least I could come up with a couple. It has to be good for innovation and protect fundamental rights. How do I measure that? Good luck with that. There is no general theory of innovation, which means that we cannot measure precisely innovation. We used to have proxies. And for fundamental rights, it's the very same. It's very hard to quantify that. I take another example, the Digital Markets Act. The objective are fairness and contestability. How do you measure whether the EU economy is fairer today than yesterday? It's nearly impossible. So from the get-go, you are guaranteed that those laws will be non-adaptive because they have objectives that we cannot verify and empirically test. And so from the get-go, you cut the idea of reassessing the regulation because too effective, not effective enough, and therefore activating the whole mechanism.
Is that also the reason why this is good for lawyers? Because then you have a law with a lot of, holes.
Yeah, certainly.
They're not easy to understand.
Yeah.
There's not a clear objective. So if you are a lawyer, you can say, but this means this, and this means this.
Yeah.
So these laws are also, good and interesting for lawyers and for
good
law
for
firms.
lawyers, consultancies, good for me. I have more papers. Probably good for you because you could make more podcasts, right? And discuss the content of the laws.
If everything was clear, then I was out of a job.
Yes, exactly. Then if everything's clear, you could compute most of the legal system, make it very effective, and, we won't have a job. So, yes. Now, I do not think, to be clear, that EU policymakers are drafting them in a way that is very clear and then ask themselves, now, how could I make that, more vague to make sure that it's going to benefit the whole economy? But it happens to be that because of the amount of regulation that we have, even if you manage to make a chapter of one regulation very clear, it's going to conflict with another regulation somewhere else. And so in the end, you are almost guaranteed that you're always going to have some conflict and trade-offs between the rules of a legal system. So I think we should not worry about our jobs.
No, and Brando Benifei, the co-rapporteur of the AI Act, told me that they developed the law in such a way that you maybe need less lawyers, because he thinks that the law is also, for companies, they have a certain amount of self-responsibility, and they don't always need a lawyer to make sure that they get their rights. So he said that they really developed the law in such a way that, they need less lawyers.
Yeah.
Which was interesting for me to hear.
Yeah, and already we see that law firms here in the Netherlands and elsewhere are creating AI departments. So, I think if the objective was to create less legal issues, I'm not sure if the AI Act is very effective in doing that.
So we started this conversation with talking about students and the skills they can learn also by working with AI. But if we go a few steps further, we are at lawyers. And lawyers, they already done their study, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. They're now working in a practice, and now AI is there. And AI is it's kind of magic word because AI is now everywhere in the law world. Every law firm wants to work with it. Everyone wants to understand it. It's a big market. What do you hear from lawyers where you talk with, or people who work in the law profession, about AI and how it changed their job?
Yeah, so it depends on where they are located, how old they are, and which clients do they have. Because you say that lawyers want to work with AI, which is true for some of them. Some of them have no choice because their clients are telling them, what used to take you 100 hours, I know will take you now 60 hours. So you're going to cut down on the price, or you're going to do more for those 100 hours that I will pay you,
Yeah,
right?
your business model is changing then as a law firm.
Yeah, it's very much changing, and charging per hour apparently seems to be on the decline because it doesn't make sense in a world where it's so hard now to quantify because technology is changing so fast what you can do in a given hour. Now, if you just exit law school, are you so happy about AI? I think potentially you should be if you are trained in how using it. Because, and I don't want here to put, strict categories and very huge cliches on people, but I think it's fair to say that it is more likely than if you are 20 years old, you are more acquainted to the use of AI system and technology than if you have a partner who's over 6 years old. It's not a rule. You may be over 6 years old and be the best AI specialist in the firm, but generally speaking, it creates a huge opportunity for our graduate students to actually go out there and to say, I can do something that you can't do, that you don't have the time to do, because as a managing partner, you have to generate business and meet with clients, while I can specialize in the use of the technology, right? I see that there are law firms in the United States that are now saying they're going to reduce how much young lawyers should charge per year from something like 2,000 hours to 400 hours. So some law firms are making a huge investment on the junior lawyers for them to acquire the capacity. Now, do you need as much junior lawyer than what used to be the case? I don't know. It remains to be seen. It may be that you need less of them or the same amount of junior lawyers and they're going to accomplish more. It depends on how successful the firm is overall. So there is a desire, but it's also forced. So that's a whole ecosystem we have to take into consideration. And depending on where you are, you may have different asks as well.
I was interviewing Pietro Ortolani, and he told me there has never been a better time to be a lawyer.
Could be. I mean, to some extent, I don't know where he's coming from, but some of the tasks that used to be extremely boring, I give you one. When I was in a law firm, I worked on a huge case in which we suspected, it's now public information, collusions between traders. What I was tasked to do was to actually listen to all the conversations between the traders that were recorded and to write the transcript of all conversation, but not a transcript where you could take some liberty. No, a transcript where every comma has to be exactly right because this will be sent to the agency eventually. And some law firms hired in Paris up to 80 junior lawyers to just transcript those conversations between traders. 80. Doing that full time. And they happen to do that in a room without any window to make it even worse. This is gone. I could easily now automate the whole process. So the tasks that are extremely boring, I think, are gone. And now will come the time for strategy, expertise, and where we could add human added value. So I would argue indeed that it's a very good time to be a lawyer.
Let's finish with something Richard Suskins told me. And he told me that future lawyer might look more like a legal engineer or a legal technologist, more legal architect. Someone who's also making sure that all the tools that we are using, for example, the AI tools, the specific law AI tools, that everything is correct, that all the output is correct.
Yep.
So of course the job will change, but there's still a very important job for you as a lawyer to make sure that the output of all these systems is correct and that it's used in the right way.
Yeah.
Would you agree with him?
So to some extent, yes. If I use AI to ask about string theory, which I've done, I'm incapable of understanding what the AI system gives me. So then I prompt the system and say, well, explain that as if I was 12 and interested in tennis. And then I get to, kind of something that I can understand. But is that true or not? I have no way to judge the quality of the information. When you are a specialist in one field and you prompt an AI system, again, in 2025, it may change. But usually I find that to be satisfactory, but never exceptional, right? I wouldn't trust an AI system to write a paper for me because it will be like good knowledge, but nothing exceptional. Not that my scholarship is exceptional, by the way, just to be clear. But so the point I want to make is that you need to have knowledge and skills to be able to evaluate the quality of what AI gives you. This will never go away unless we have a fully automated judicial system, but I don't believe it's going to happen in the next 50 years. So I would agree with him on that. What I think we're going to see is that each single law firms will also acquire that technical expertise. And we're going to see specialization where teams of computer data scientists, people with computational science expertise, will make sure that all of the other lawyers can focus more on the substance and on writing and generating ideas. So I'm not sure if every single lawyer need to be an engineer in that sense. To some extent, yes, but some will have the task of being clear engineers and engineering a system for other lawyers within the firm. I'm extremely bad at prediction. So, of course, I will ask you for the right to be forgotten in a couple of years and to delete this part of the video.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Legal AI Lab. Many thanks to my guest, Thibault Schrepel. Follow and subscribe in your podcast app, leave a review and share this episode. More conversations are coming with global leaders in AI law, justice and policy. I'm Hidde Bruinsma. See you next time.
This episode is powered by Zeno. Zeno's AI navigates law like a human legal professional, grounded in authoritative sources, backed by traceable citations. Visit zeno.law and make deep thinking your competitive edge.